Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. On a public show such as this, there's a tendency to focus on the positive, to highlight successes, to inspire you, the listener, to greater heights. On today's show, we're talking about one of the darker sides of being in business. But as Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, says, you must confront the brutal facts. And that's what we're going to do today. Earlier today, I got a phone call from another investor. We're good friends. We've known each other many years. He's a good person with strong values and strong ethics. The story he told me was so sad. Sad because it's happened to him. Sad because it's happened to me. Sad because nearly everyone I know who's been in business for a while has a similar story. On today's show, we're talking about what you can do when you face a theft in your business. Often, the victim is a high-profile individual. A few weeks ago, I was speaking with a high-profile author, and he was describing the times when he was a victim of theft. A month ago, I was speaking with a high-profile jeweler. The jeweler was a victim of employee theft. When the employee was confronted, their response was, well, you didn't seem like you needed the money, and I did, so I took it. These cases are incredibly common. In this case, on today's phone call, my friend had hired a general contractor. The contractor asked for draws on the construction in advance of work being done. The contractor had lots of good reasons why the funds should be advanced before the schedule said they were needed. Not long afterwards, inconsistencies started to appear between the story being told by the contractor and the facts on the ground. When everything was eventually laid bare, it was clear that the contractor had, in his words, borrowed funds, and in the end, far more than the borrowed funds were missing. The subcontractors had not been paid, and the jobs had been underbid. The net result is a project with a contractual commitment that cannot be fulfilled, and then there are stolen funds on top of the situation. I encountered a very similar situation several years ago. The crooks who do this are very adept at establishing trust and using a fabricated web of evidence to create that trust and support their stories. You would think a serial crook would have a string of bad references which would eventually catch up with him. I think over time that does happen. But this particular one had a tactic of doing small jobs for free in exchange for a good review. And then he would use that good review as a reference. The person who gave the good review felt obligated to do so because they got something for free. A professional manipulator will use tactics like this to stretch the truth. A similar situation happened to me. I had a partner who was also the general contractor on a project. They spent the funds allocated for the project. Then they spent additional funds from their own account and demanded repayment, but they could not produce receipts for the work and materials performed. Needless to say, a dispute ensued. The contractor ended up putting a mechanic's lien on a property in which he was a part owner. These types of situations are rare and surprisingly common. My friend performed due diligence on the contractor, or at least he thought he did. He didn't fact-check the numerous stories that the contractor told him. As I examine what it means to perform proper due diligence, I look at the due diligence checklist one of our newest lenders is using. Their checklist is extremely comprehensive. At first, my reaction was to be taken aback by the extent of the checklist. But when I look at the complete list, it would be virtually impossible for a fraud to go undetected by our lender with such a comprehensive list. It shows me what a proper due diligence looks like. I'm not a rookie at due diligence. I've been involved in corporate mergers and acquisitions since 1999. I thought I was pretty good at it. In retrospect, now that I've seen how another company does it, I have a new respect for how deep a process due diligence can be. I'm sorry for my friend. I feel for what he's going through. While what happened is not his fault, he is still responsible. And that's the painful part. You can do everything right, and if someone on your team does something wrong, you are still responsible, even if you're not at fault. Every employee at Boeing right now is sharing responsibility for 2 jets that crashed, even though the actual fault probably only lies with a handful of people who made a hasty decision. When you put due diligence in the context of approving an aircraft's control software, the standards are pretty clear. But what about hiring a general contractor? The stakes are not as high. Or are they? You don't need a crook in your midst. Innocent mistakes can be just as dangerous. We all make mistakes. I certainly do. They're embarrassing, they're painful, and they're a necessary part of learning. Mistakes are not to be avoided altogether. The only true way to avoid mistakes is to do nothing at all. Mistakes are to be expected. They're there to learn from and to be caught and corrected before the consequences are catastrophic. If you're thinking about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Focus on due diligence. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.